Okay, welcome to another episode of Mr. K is Wrong, where I look at the Facebook memes posted by somebody I used to know in my high school days that I call Mr. K, and I debunk his crap, his right wing nonsense. So, what is the meme this time? What am I going to debunk and sort of assess here? So it's a meme that he posted on his Facebook wall that says, if you've noticed, Democrats aren't talking about egg prices anymore. They aren't talking about inflation anymore. They aren't talking about tariffs anymore. They aren't talking about the stock market anymore. They aren't talking about the border anymore. So now they're planning demonstrations to fight authoritarianism, which they put in quotation marks, to sort of suggest that there is no authoritarianism. And the meme continues, why? Because Trump solved every single one of these issues in 5 months. They've run out of ammunition. Oh, wow. So that's the end of the meme right there. That's supposed to be like a major gotcha. So the idea that the Democrats have stopped talking about all those other things because authoritarianism under Trump is such an issue, it's not quite the own of the Democrats that they apparently think it is, that this original person who posted this thought it was, and that Mr. K thinks it is. It's actually it's actually a little bit jarring that somebody would think that this is an own. And of course it's also not true. They are still talking about all of these other things. It's just you have to alternate because there's so much stuff going on that they're inundated. It's hard to emphasize any one issue, and that's sort of Trump's strategy to, well, as Steve Bannon put it, he said to flood the zone with shit. And that is exactly what they are doing. They're creating so many different uh, crazy issues for the society at large that it's very tricky to focus on any one thing and to do any single action against any one thing. So let's look at the egg prices and inflation claim that nobody's talking about that anymore. Well, egg prices spiked due to a massive avian flu outbreak. Wholesale prices are up 125% year over year, with retail near $6 per dozen in early 2025 and even higher in some regions. So I'm pretty sure some people are talking about that. And correct me if I'm wrong about any of that information, but it does sound accurate. So while inflation has cooled since 2022, egg and food prices remain stubbornly high. These issues are still part of public discussion, including by Democrats who are highlighting the everyday pinch. For example, egg prices remain a major talking point in campaign messaging whenever there is still a you know a race for political office. You might hear them, at least in one or two campaign ads, mention not just the price of eggs, but of course the prices of other things. Because, well, that's sort of a standard issue that somebody might bring up in this day and age. So the idea that nobody's talking about it, I think that one's pretty easy to debunk. So I don't know, I don't know why anyone would spend that much time debunking it when all you need to find are, examples of, the political ads talking about it, or stories in the media that sort of debunk the idea that people are now ignoring it. So, tariffs, Trump recently paused but then threatened sweeping reciprocal tariffs. A July deadline to roll back these tariffs might be pushed out, but Democrats aren't silent. They're pursuing legislation like the Trade Review Act to restore congressional oversight on tariffs. And you may have heard some stories about that. So the public remains divided. A recent poll shows 57% believe Trump's tariffs are harmful, though for whatever reason, 46% still support them. Maybe it's because they're not fully aware of, the nature of tariffs, that they will end up paying the price in the stores. And oddly enough, Donald Trump sort of debunked the idea that, the other countries will pay for it, because in his sort of mad rant to Walmart, he told them to eat the tariffs. He was telling Walmart to eat the tariffs. Well, hold on a second. If other countries are supposed to pay for them, then Walmart wouldn't really have to eat the tariffs. And it was another one of those freaky contradictions that, for a lot of people, apparently just went unnoticed, because he basically admitted right then and there that yes, these businesses that we often rely on will end up paying the price. And what he meant with the eat the tariffs thing is, that Walmart should just absorb the tariffs and not increase the prices to the consumers. But of course, that's not what these businesses are in business to do. They want to make money. And believe it or not, it'll this will sound like I'm going out of my way to defend Walmart or something, but it's just sort of a general fact. Even a mega business like Walmart could potentially go out of business if they are consistently forced to eat things like tariffs, because no matter how much money they rake in, if enough of the profits are being eaten up, it could prove to be unsustainable. It kind of doesn't matter what the large numbers are in terms of like how many billions they're making or whatever. The fact is, if you're not making enough profits, it's going to be a bad thing for a business. And I bet the average consumer or the average voter might not understand that. But you could be a mega successful business and still go out of business. That's because the math doesn't care how large the numbers are. It's so the whole thing with Trump is that he doesn't care about the math, and you should care though, because it will impact you. Because if you're a smaller business being impacted by these tariffs, well, you're going to have a harder time eating the tariffs, so to speak, right? So if the Democrats are smart, they will still occasionally raise this as an issue, because it is definitely an issue. And the business world, it's uh, it's definitely a complicated topic that I won't pretend to know everything about, because I'm not really a businessman. But I do know that sometimes businesses can be driven under by bad policy. And tariffs, in the first place, they are supposed to be, they're not supposed to be a universal thing. They're supposed to be targeted, right? I don't think that's a particularly hidden aspect of a tariff. The simple fact is that you're supposed to apply them in specific situations to get specific outcomes. You don't need to be an expert to understand that. That's one of the entry level things you learn when you're looking into what a tariff is that, they're not something that you're supposed to apply universally across the board, because that, in a way, that defies the very point of them, which is to have a specific policy outcome. Unless you sort of foolishly think that they're a sort of fix all situation. Like, if you can solve every issue through tariffs, universal tariffs, That is not really how things work. And if you want to have, a manufacturing boom or something like that, well, then you need to have a policy in place to bring factories back. And tariffs alone are not going to do that. In fact, they're probably going to substantially hurt the creation of new businesses, be it manufacturing or anything else, because it's impacting the global economy and raising costs across the board. But anyway, what about claim number three? Now, this one is one I don't care as much about. The stock market, the claim is that Democrats and presumably liberals and leftists across the board are ignoring the stock market, as the meme suggests. But the talking point is less relevant. Markets are at or near record highs at the moment. So Democrats aren't ignoring, the stock market. They just see these gains as contextual. They reflect broader economic trends, not really a Trump miracle, but they see everything Trump does as miraculous, or if anything happens that's even slightly positive while he's in office, they see it as something that he accomplished. Um, but the fun fact about the stock market is that it doesn't really tell the whole story, right? These are these are just how well the stock market is doing. And I'm not an expert on that, so I'm going to kind of let that one slide as a topic here. So, what about the border? As of June 12th, 2025, Trump deployed National Guard and Marines to LA amidst mass deportation efforts, which has sparked street protests, Democratic outcry, and court challenges. So the meme is just wrong about this one. Of course, Democrats have focused at least somewhat on the border, and right now they're being kind of forced to focus on it by what is happening here. So Democrats, at least the better ones, are calling for balanced reforms, ensure security but protect human rights and due process. And they're actually debating new reforms like the so-called Lake and Riley Act and sanctuary policies. So no, the issue hasn't vanished. And by the way, when it comes to the Lake and Riley Act, remember that was sort of a cynical effort to look at the death of one person as somehow representing every immigrant who could or would come into the country, to try to smear them all as if they are murderers or something like that. When, of course, as the statistics have shown, the average immigrant is not a murderer or a rapist or what have you. They want you to believe otherwise, but of course, that is not reflected by the statistics. And we know fully well that a lot of the people being deported or in other ways incarcerated are innocent. They don't have violent criminal histories, but they're doing that anyway. They're coming into these various, well, basically across the country, uh, various cities, and of course small towns. I'm sure are being affected too, and they're having these ICE agents without uniforms and without even revealing like the specific nature of the offense. And the vehicles are unmarked in a lot of these cases. So for all anybody knows, it could just be a random kidnapper masquerading as an ICE agent for one thing. And boy, if I was a criminal out there looking to kidnap somebody, this would be like the perfect time to do that. And that's one of the reasons why these protests are happening in the first place. It doesn't necessarily even mean that everybody is concerned about a specific instance. It's the very nature of what is happening. The fact that these ICE agents, they could be anybody, and they could show up claiming to be an ICE agent and just arresting people. And when it comes to the sanctuary cities that these MAGA morons are so often uh, condemning, the point there is that if somebody who does not have their immigration documents, or whatever, if they witness a crime, they would feel safe to go to the police to report that a crime has actually occurred, and that would actually help law and order. You know, if you could report a crime without fear of being, um, I guess, sent out of the country. So the other main point about that is, keep in mind that a sanctuary city does not mean that they're going to like fight the deportation process. It just means that the city itself is not going to make it easier. They're not going to collaborate in any significant way with ICE. It means they're not going to get in the way of it, but they're not going to make it any easier. So that for some of these people is a bridge too far. Even though, keep in mind, the immigration stuff that is at the federal level. It isn't at the state or local level that officials even have to deal with those issues directly. In fact, they're expected not to in a lot of cases. Of course, with the federal overreach and the sort of Gestapo tactics that are happening now, I think there will be increased pressure for state and local government to sort of get in the way of these efforts, because they are violating the law. They're violating the Constitution in a huge number of these instances by not following due process, and frankly, by just creating a sort of environment of panic. They are acting without any semblance of law and order. In a lot of cases, they're targeting people deliberately, um, for fascistic reasons. They're targeting people who look different, who they target kids in schools now. And the main point of that is to emphasize that we'll go after anybody. Anybody who is in a vulnerable situation, will go after them. So of course there's going to be some pressure to address these overreaches. And I wouldn't want to be in a position where I'm in a local government as any sort of leader right now, because you're you're under a lot of pressure from a lot of different directions. And you know it would be hard to know exactly what the right thing to do would be, especially if you're sort of a conformist from the start. You want to follow the normal way of doing things, but that's no longer a possibility in a lot of cases, because these ICE agents, they could be anybody. They could be some white nationalist just showing up randomly, dressed in the style of an ICE agent, and you could basically kidnap anybody out there that you want to kidnap. So it's a very tough spot for local and state governments, for sure. So the idea that no Democrats are talking about this is, of course, absurd. That leads me to the other point, which is that now they're emphasizing authoritarianism. Well, of course they are, because that's a lot of what there is to talk about. Authoritarianism and Project 2025, as it has been called. Democrats are raising the alarm because Trump's own actions validate their concerns. He's threatened to deploy federal military against domestic protests And now he has done so in Los Angeles, which is his initial testing grounds for this. He's signaled ambitions to be a dictator on day one and roll back voting rights, which he has definitely tried to do in the courts with mixed success. But if he just keeps hammering away at voting, he will have more success over time if the people don't sort of fight back. And fortunately, the uh, the voters and the general public still does have ways to overpower these efforts, but they've got to remain active, and that's what Trump is trying to make sure that they don't do. And it won't just be in Los Angeles; it'll be in other places where he's trying to make people too afraid to show up and criticize him or even vote against him. Project 2025 aims to purge federal workers, which it has largely done. It wants to dismantle civil service, which it largely has done, and centralize power, which it largely has done. And this is widely seen by constitutional scholars as authoritarian. And not enough Democrats have criticized it, but there are definitely some. And I do believe that if we are able to have elections in the midterms, that the that some of the biggest success stories will be those who challenge the authoritarian tendencies that are happening right now. So these concerns are far more urgent than egg prices or the border. They're about the integrity of US democracy. So, of course, some Democrats are definitely paying more attention to these immediate issues. And the bottom line is the narrative that Democrats have no issues left is false. They're still fighting these same economic battles, but the intensity shifts based on real world conditions. So today the stakes are existential. Authoritarianism is not an invention, it's an alarm sparked by Trump's own words and plans. And, the Democratic Party, if it wishes to survive and to, preserve the American way of life, it's going to be a voice for those who are being impacted most by these authoritarian tendencies.